Hey team, and welcome to our next vodcast for the 1920s. For this vodcast, we're going to be focusing on social unrest. What types of groups are being targeted after World War I? Why are there specific groups that are being discriminated against? And what's the outcome? How does it start to make changes within the United States? So we're going to start with one of the groups actually who are usually very favored in the United States, which are our labor unions. Since the early 1800s, since industrialization, since workers have decided that they will not work an average of 100 hours a week, and that we're going to be asking for child labor to be erased throughout the progressive era, it's been in the favor of Americans, at least from the view of the average American, that labor unions are a good thing. Organize, unionize, make sure you're being paid fair wages, make sure you're being compensated for your time, that you're not working weekends, you're getting some time for your family to relax, to regroup. But what happens in 1912 and in 1919 are two of the most famous strikes in our history, and both of them happen to be in Massachusetts. It's not to say that there weren't other labor strikes around the world or in the United States, but Massachusetts actually puts themselves on the map for both of these labor strikes. So let's talk about them. In 1912, we're going to see in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is a city much like Boston, not the same size, in a more rural area because we're going to see more mill work. It's a little bit, it's not as like skyscraper-ish as we see in Boston. It has a very dense population though, most of them being textiles, working with fabrics and making clothing during this time. They were making an average of $8.50 a week, which is like mind-blowing that would be a total earnings at the end of a week. Most of us, that's lower than minimum wage now, but it's not a good wage. And their employers are going to decide that they're going to cut their salaries by 32 cents a week. Now, 32 cents doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're already making such a low wage, that means you have to decide whether or not you're going to eat every day, right? Are you going to pay your rent? Are you going to pay your mortgage? Are you going to take your kid to the doctor if they're sick? You have to make these impossible decisions over 32 cents a week. So this is going to cause the mill workers to organize, and they're going to strike in 1912. The slogan that they used was short pay, all out, all out. This strike becomes so violent that the children living in Lawrence are actually going to be outsourced and sent to family members or just random people in New York City to take care of the children because people were stabbed on the picket lines, people were shot on the picket lines, and it got really, really dangerous. So it wasn't safe for especially women during this time to have their children with them on the picket lines. So they were sent off to New York City. They had organizations and other labor unions who supported them and helped them. The outcome of this labor union is that in this strike is going to be that the laborers actually win. They get their money back, which is great. Not all of it, but they get a majority of it back. And it's actually going to ripple out into other textile industries where there's been threats of other strikes happening. And because the Lawrence one was so vicious and so devastating because there's loss of life during this strike, that actually it's going to prevent other strikes from happening. And it's also going to help them create a stronger union where they started working less hours, better compensation, and no weekends, which is also huge. Okay. Another major strike during this time period actually happens in the city of Boston, and it's going to be our police officers who are striking. Again, for higher wages, less hours, safer working conditions. This happens in 1919. When your police force goes on strike, that is very risky. People took advantage in Boston. They knew the police were on strike. They knew there weren't very many scabs, and scabs are people who cross the picket line and work anyway, despite the fact that everyone should be on strike. And they start looting. They start destroying the city. And the Massachusetts governor, Calvin Coolidge, who's a future president of the United States, is actually going to fire all the police officers in Boston because he says if you can't put the people of Massachusetts, the city of Boston, ahead of yourselves and your needs, then you're not fit to be a police officer. This is actually him putting down this strike is going to be a great asset for him when he decides to run for president of the United States. He's tough on what he considered to be crime on the American people because of this strike, although they are our law enforcers. He was able to spin it to make it seem like he was tough on crime and obviously a good selection to become president of the United States eventually. So what's the economic impact of both of these strikes? We actually see the concept of labor unions and striking as a problem in our society. This used to be something that was cherished, that was promoted amongst the average American, but now the concept of labor unions and striking is seen as unpatriotic. It's seen as going against the kind of privileges that we have in the United States. And a lot of that happens because of World War I, because of the forced labor that happened, the total war during World War I. People were willing to put some of those rights aside in order to see the greater good of the United States and winning in World War I. And now that this war is over, people want those rights back. They want their wages back. They want their time back. And the American government is going to support the business owners and leadership who decide who stays and who goes, who's hired, who's fired. And it's going to cost a lot of people their jobs, where being a part of a labor union during this time period actually hurt you more than it helped you. Okay. The other things that we just want to consider are going to be some of the other national unrest that are happening. We are going to have our first Red Scare, and the Red Scare is going to be a fear of communism, fear that communism could spread to the United States. So red, because red is associated with communism, and then scare, the fear of communism spreading to the United States. We're also going to see an increase in racism, this white supremacy that's going to emerge, this concept of nativism, where unless you are a native-born person, you've been born in the United States, you're an immigrant, you don't belong, you are not equal. And during the 1920s, we're also going to see a huge revival of the KKK. This is where cross burnings start. Actually, there was a cross burning in Medfield in 1927 in front of a home of an Italian family because they felt that as Italian immigrants, they were not welcome in Medfield. And so they burned a cross in front of their home trying to get them to leave town. So it's not something that was just happening in the South. It's happening all over the United States. And we also have this fear of anarchists. We have this fear that people are coming to the United States who don't believe in democracy or don't believe in organized government, who are trying to blow up and ruin the freedoms and our Constitution that we are accustomed to, that our country was founded on, and is very, very important to us. So that's what the cartoon is. You can see a European anarchist with holding a bomb behind the Statue of Liberty. It says, "Come unto me, ye oppressed," which is symbolic of Lady Liberty, saying that she welcomes all, doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, you're welcome in the United States, but that we're letting in these people immigrating to the United States who are actually here to destroy our country, is the fear, rather than accepting them for being a part of the melting pot that is the United States. Okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about the KKK in class. So I am going to end here tonight. I hope you have a great night.